The marble floor of the Hargrove Financial Center caught the afternoon light in long, pale strips, the kind of light that made everything inside look more important than it probably was. Nobody paid much attention to the man who came through the revolving door at 2:15 on a Tuesday. He was wearing a gray wool jacket that had seen better decades, dark trousers with a crease that had long since softened into suggestion, and boots that belonged more to a farm property than a Bay Street tower. He carried a battered canvas satchel over one shoulder. He paused just inside the entrance, looked around the lobby once, slowly, the way a person looks at something they know well, rather than something they're trying to figure out, and then walked toward the reception desk at a pace that suggested he had nowhere urgent to be. His name was Leonard Ashby. He was 61 years old. He had driven into the city that morning in a 2009 Silverado with a cracked rear bumper and a Tim Hortons cup wedged in the cup holder, and if you had passed him on the 401, you would not have given him a second thought. The woman behind the reception desk, whose name tag read Courtney, looked up from her monitor and took him in the way people in certain buildings take in certain people. A flicker of assessment, a small internal calibration, a conclusion reached before a single word was spoken. "Can I help you?" she said. The words were correct. The tone was careful in the way that is not the same as careful. "I have a 2:30 with the acquisitions team," Leonard said. His voice was quiet and unhurried, a voice that had never needed volume to carry weight. Leonard Ashby. Courtney typed something. Looked at her screen. Typed again. "I'm not seeing anything under that name," she said. "Try Ashby Holdings," he said. She typed. The screen appeared to give her different information than she expected, because something shifted behind her eyes. A small thing quickly managed. "One moment," she said, and reached for her phone. Leonard set his satchel down beside the desk and looked out through the glass wall at King Street. A cyclist wove between two delivery trucks. A woman in a yellow coat was arguing with a parking meter. He watched all of this with the mild, unhurried interest of a man who had spent a great deal of time watching the world and had long since stopped needing it to perform for him. He did not hear the approach from behind him, but he heard the voice. "Excuse me." He turned. The woman who had spoken was in her early 40s, in a charcoal blazer and heels that added 3 inches she did not need. Her hair was pulled back in a way that communicated seriousness. She was holding a tablet in one hand and a lanyard in the other, and she was looking at Leonard the way people look at something that has appeared in the wrong place. Her name was Brooke Callister. She was Senior Director of Client Relations at Hargrove Financial, which meant she was the person responsible for ensuring that the people who came through these doors felt either welcomed or, if necessary, redirected. She had been very good at her job for 11 years. "This is a client access lobby," Brooke said. Her voice carried the particular pitch of someone who has said a version of this sentence many times and has stopped feeling bad about it. "Are you here for a delivery? The service entrance is on Adelaide." Leonard looked at her, not with anger, not with hurt. He looked at her the way you look at weather. Something happening in the world, noted, not personal. "I have a meeting," he said. "With whom?" "The acquisitions team. 2:30. Brooke glanced at Courtney, who gave a small, uncertain shake of her head. Not the head shake of someone who had found nothing, but of someone who had found something they didn't know how to handle. "I'll need to verify that," Brooke said. "Perhaps you'd like to wait over there." She gestured toward a seating area near the far wall. The chairs that were technically in the lobby but positioned in the way that meant outside of things. Leonard picked up his satchel. He walked to the chairs and sat down. He pulled out his phone, an older model, the kind without a case, and began reading something. He did not appear to be offended. He did not appear to be particularly anything, and somehow that was the most unsettling thing Brooke Callister had seen all afternoon. She walked to the reception desk. "Who is he?" she said. "Low." Courtney hesitated. "He's the name flagged in our system. He's listed as a pre-approved guest for the Ashby file." "What's the Ashby file?" Courtney turned the monitor slightly toward her. Brooke read. Then she read it again. The color in her face did a quiet thing. "Why didn't you say something?" Brooke said. "You came over very quickly," Courtney said, which was the most diplomatic version of the truth available to her. Brooke straightened. She looked across the lobby to where Leonard was sitting in the peripheral chairs, reading his phone, the canvas satchel at his feet, the battered jacket hanging open at the collar. She walked back toward him with a different posture than the one she had left him with. "Mr. Ashby," she said, "I apologize for the confusion. Can I get you anything while you wait? Water? Coffee?" "I'm fine," he said, without looking up. She stood there for a moment, uncertain of whether she had been dismissed or simply released, then went back to her desk. What Brooke Callister did not know, and what almost no one in that building knew, was what Leonard Ashby had been doing for the past 4 decades in the small Ontario town of Dunmore, about 2.5 hours northeast of Toronto. He had grown up there. His father had been a cabinet maker who worked out of a shed behind the house, and Leonard had spent his childhood with sawdust in his hair and the smell of varnish in his clothes. He had not gone to university. He had gone to a 2-year trades program in Peterborough, come back to Dunmore, and started a small contracting company in his mid-20s with 1 truck, 2 employees, and a work ethic that his father had installed in him so early and so deeply that he could no longer distinguish it from personality. By the time he was 40, the company had built most of the residential developments on the north side of Dunmore. By 45, it had expanded into commercial properties. By 50, Ashby Holdings had a portfolio that extended across 4 provinces and included, among other things, a 17% stake in the company that owned the building Leonard Ashby was currently sitting in. He had never moved to Toronto. He had never bought a larger house than the one he and his wife Carol had purchased in 1991 for $220,000, which they had renovated themselves over 3 years, which still had the same kitchen table where Leonard drank his coffee every morning at 5:45 before driving to whatever site needed him. He had never changed the truck. He had never changed the jacket, which had been his father's. He had also never particularly wanted anyone to know any of this, not because he was hiding it, but because he had found over the years that the people who knew tended to behave differently around him, and he preferred people who behaved like themselves. The acquisitions meeting was on the 14th floor. Leonard arrived 2 minutes before 2:30, was shown into a boardroom with floor-to-ceiling windows and a long table that seated 20, and found 4 people waiting for him, 2 analysts, a senior associate, and a man named Derek Foss, who was the head of the acquisitions division, and who stood up very quickly when Leonard walked in. "Mr. Ashby," Derek said, extending his hand, "thank you for making the trip. We would have sent someone to you if you'd preferred." "I don't mind the drive," Leonard said. He sat down. He opened his satchel and pulled out a folder, paper, not a tablet, and set it on the table, and for the next 90 minutes he talked about the proposed acquisition of a mixed-use development property in Sudbury, with the quiet, steady precision of someone who had been thinking about exactly this for a very long time. The analysts exchanged glances several times. Not the glances of people who are skeptical, but of people who are recalibrating. Derek Foss, who had been in acquisitions for 22 years and who considered himself a reasonable judge of what a meeting was worth, found himself taking more notes than he had expected. When it was over, Leonard stood, shook hands with each person in the room, thanked them for their time, and took the elevator down to the lobby. He was crossing the marble floor toward the exit when he heard his name. Leonard. He turned. The man who had coming from the direction of the private elevators, the ones that required a key card and went only to the upper floors. He was in his late 60s, silver-haired, in a dark suit that had been made for him specifically, and he was walking with the unhurried directness of someone accustomed to a room rearranging itself around his arrival. His name was Hugh Warrender. He was the chairman of Hargrove Financial Group, which he had built from a mid-sized regional bank into the institution it was now over the course of 30 years. And he and Leonard Ashby had known each other since 1987, when they had both been 24 years old and bidding on the same construction contract in a town neither of them lived in anymore. "Hugh," Leonard said. They shook hands, not the formal handshake of business associates. The handshake of 2 men who had eaten meals in each other's kitchens, who had helped each other move furniture, who had, on one occasion in 1994, spent a February night stranded together in a truck on the highway outside Barrie, because neither of them had thought to check the forecast. "How was the meeting?" Hugh said. "Good. Your people are sharp. Derek's the best I've got." Hugh looked at him for a moment. "You didn't tell anyone who you were, did you?" It was not quite a question. "I told them my name," Leonard said. Hugh smiled, It was the smile of a man who had known Leonard Ashby for 37 years and had long since accepted certain things about him. The lobby, which had been moving in its ordinary way around them, had slowed. Not stopped. That would have been too obvious. But slowed, the way a room slows when something happens that people sense without being able to name. Two men near the coffee station were watching without appearing to watch. Courtney, at the reception desk, was very still. Brooke Callister had emerged from a hallway and come to a stop near the far pillar. She was watching Leonard Ashby and Hugh Warrender standing in the middle of the lobby, the chairman of Hargrove Financial and the man she had directed to the service entrance on Adelaide. And she was doing the mathematics of what she was seeing, and the answer she kept arriving at did not improve upon repetition. Hugh said something. Leonard laughed, a quiet, genuine sound. Hugh clapped him once on the shoulder, the way old friends do. They spoke for another minute, easy and unhurried, and then Hugh said something about dinner, and Leonard said he'd have Carol check the calendar. And then they parted in the comfortable way of people who know they will see each other again and are not in a rush about it. Leonard walked toward the exit. He passed within a few feet of Brooke Callister without looking at her, not deliberately. He simply did not appear to need anything from her. She stood at the pillar for a moment after he had gone through the revolving door, watching the space where he had been. Outside, through the glass, she could see him crossing King Street. He had his satchel over his shoulder and his hands in the pockets of the gray wool jacket, and he was walking with the same unhurried pace he had arrived with, and the afternoon light was catching the street around him in a way that made the whole scene look for a moment like something she would have difficulty explaining later. She went to Hugh Warrender's assistant the following morning. She did not say what she was looking for exactly, but she said she had met a Leonard Ashby in the lobby the previous day and was trying to understand the relationship. The assistant looked at her for a moment with an expression that was professionally neutral but contained, somewhere underneath the surface, a small quantity of pity. Ashby Holdings, the assistant said, holds 17% of Hargrove Financial Group. Mr. Ashby was the original investor in the King Street property. The building you're standing in, the Hargrove Financial Center, was built by one of his subsidiaries in 2003. Brooke said nothing for a moment. The lobby floor, the assistant continued because she had apparently decided to be thorough. The atrium design, the facade, all Ashby. She paused. He's also the reason we have the Sudbury portfolio. He brought that deal to us 17 years ago when he didn't have to. Brooke thanked her and went back to her office and sat at her desk and looked at the wall for a while. She thought about what she had said. This is a client access lobby. The service entrance is on Adelaide. She thought about the way he had looked at her, not angry, not wounded, just noting her, the way you note weather. She thought about how he had walked to the peripheral chairs without protest and sat there reading his phone, and how that patience had not been the patience of someone who didn't know their own position. It had been the patience of someone who did. That was the part she couldn't stop turning over. He had known exactly who he was. He had simply not felt the need to say so. In the weeks that followed, Brooke Callister found herself thinking about it at unexpected moments. At the coffee station in the morning, in meetings that ran long, on the drive home when the highway slowed to a crawl near the 427. She thought about the way the lobby had worked before that Tuesday and the way it worked after, which was the same and also not the same. She had spent 11 years deciding, in the first 4 seconds, what a person was likely to be worth. She was good at it. She had been told she was good at it, and she had been wrong about Leonard Ashby in all 4 seconds. Every one of them, and she had been wrong with the complete confidence of someone who has no idea they are wrong, which was the worst kind. She did not see him again for 3 months. When she did, it was at an event, a private dinner for the Hargrove Foundation, held on the 42nd floor, the kind of evening where the city spread out below the windows like a diagram of itself, and people wore their professional identities like second skin. She spotted him near the window. He was in the same gray wool jacket. He was holding a glass of water and looking out at the city, and no one was paying him particular attention because he had the quality, she understood it now, of making himself easy to overlook, which was not the same as being easy to overlook. She crossed the room. It took her a moment to find the words, which was unusual for her. "Mr. Ashby," she said, "I'm Brooke Callister. We met in the lobby in September." He looked at her. His eyes were calm and brown and gave away nothing. "I remember," he said. "I wanted to apologize," she said. "What I said to you about the service entrance, that was wrong. Not procedurally. I mean, it was wrong in the way I meant it." He was quiet for a moment. Out the window, the city moved in its 10,000 small ways. "It happens," he said. And he said it without performance. Not graciously, not coldly, just plainly, as a fact he had observed enough times that it no longer required a verdict. "I think it happens more than it should," she said. He considered that. He looked out the window again at the lights beginning to come on across the skyline. "Probably," he said. They stood there for a moment in a silence that was not comfortable but was not unkind. "Your father's jacket?" she asked, because she had read that in the background note his assistant had eventually sent her, and she wasn't sure why she said it, only that it seemed true to say. He glanced at the sleeve. "His," he said. He'd have found all this, a small gesture toward the room, the table, the foundation banners, a bit much. What would he have made of the building? Leonard thought about this. He would have looked at the joins on the facade, he said. "Told me whether they were done right." A pause. "They were done right." Brooke nodded. She didn't know what else to say, so she said nothing else, and after a moment she excused herself and went back across the room. She would think about that conversation for a long time afterward. Not the apology which she had needed to make, but which had been for her more than for him. Not even the jacket. She would think about the way he had said they were done right, the quiet satisfaction in it, the precision, the fact that it was the thing that mattered to him out of everything in the room. What Brooke Callister had seen in the lobby that September Tuesday, though she hadn't known it then, was the end of something and the beginning of something else. Not dramatically, not in the way that things end and begin in stories that want you to know what they mean. In the ordinary way that shifts happen, beneath the surface, in the accumulation of small reckonings, in the space between what we assume and what turns out to be true. Leonard Ashby drove back to Dunmore that evening. He stopped for gas outside Peterborough, bought a coffee at the counter, chatted with the woman at the register about the weather turning. He got back in the Silverado and put the city behind him and watched the highway open out into the dark flat of the Ontario countryside, the way it always did, the way it had always done. He thought about the Sudbury deal. He thought about a drainage problem on a property he was trying to sort out near Bancroft. He thought about calling his son in the morning. He did not think about the woman in the lobby, or what she had thought of him when he walked in, or what she had learned since. He had made his peace with that kind of thing a long time ago. Not bitterly, not with any particular wisdom he had worked to arrive at, but simply because he had found that the people who needed to see something eventually did, and the people who didn't, and very little that he did, or said made the difference either way. He pulled into Dunmore at 9:30. The house was lit in the kitchen, which meant Carol was still up. He pulled the Silverado into the drive, sat for a moment with the engine off, and listened to the particular silence of a place that has been your home for a very long time. Then he went inside. The kitchen smelled like the soup she'd had on the stove that morning. She was at the table with a book, a mug beside her that had gone cold. She looked up when he came in. "How was the city?" she said. "Fine," he said. "Long drive back. There's soup if you want. I'll have some." He hung the jacket on the hook by the door, his father's hook, which had been there since before the renovation in which they had built around deliberately, and went to the cupboard for a bowl, and the kitchen settled into the ordinary sounds of a Tuesday evening in a house that had been lived in well. Outside, through the window above the sink, the yard was dark and quiet. The old oak at the edge of the property stood where it had always stood. In the morning there would be frost on the grass, the first of the season, and Leonard Ashby would drink his coffee at 5:45 and watch it catch the light, and it would be enough, as it had always been enough, because he had never needed the world to announce his worth to him. He had always known where it lived.